I'm Andy Agavangelo. I'm the founder of the Transparency Task Force. We're a UK-based certified social enterprise, and our purpose, our formal mission, if you like, is to promote reform of the financial sector so that it serves society better. We raise awareness of our work and the important cause that we are supporting in many different ways. We, for example, respond to industry consultations. We get ourselves into the media. We occasionally take part in court activities. We do all kinds of things, including run marches. The march in Dublin on the 18th of September will be our third march. We ran one in 2022 in London, another one this year in London in April, and the one in Dublin on the 18th will be March number 3. And in some ways, what's important about the march in Dublin on the 18th of September is that it's our first march which is not restricted exclusively to the issues pertaining to the financial services sector. And we're obviously looking to get as many people participating as possible. And the reason for this meeting that we're having tonight, that's been recorded so that others who can't attend can still access it, is to kind of remind ourselves about what we're doing and why we are doing it. And we hope and believe that once people fully understand what we're doing and why we're doing it, it's going to be a well-attended march in Dublin on the 18th of September. Now, interestingly, the march on the 18th of September is not going to be the only march that we do in Dublin. It takes time to build momentum around any cause. And I think of our first march in Dublin as the beginnings of something. There is absolutely no reason why we can't be marching every 6 months, every 12 months, every quarter, every month, every week. There is no limit on the amount of marching and protesting that we can do. So we don't know what's going to happen after the 18th of September, but we do know that it is going to take a sustained effort from many people, including, of course, us here at the Transparency Task Force, to drive the kind of attention-raising activity that is necessary to get the politicians and the press involved. What I'm going to be doing, first of all, folks, is just covering off the basic facts about the march, talking about the route and talking about timings, because there's a particular aspect of timings that I want everybody to understand. So I'm going to share my screen. What you're looking at is something I'm sure you will have already seen. It's the website for the March for Justice, taking place in Dublin on the 18th of September. 21 days to go, 17 hours, 53 minutes and 50 seconds. And we meet at 11:30 at the Four Courts. Now, when I say we meet at 11:30, we'll probably get everyone there earlier than that. We'll probably get folks there for about 11 o'clock because we need to be leaving the Four Courts location by 11:30 at the latest. The reason for that is going to become clear when I talk to you about what we're planning to do at 1:30. But we get to Four Courts in time to leave it at 11:30 after a few people, including myself, have had a chance to speak. From the Four Courts, we go to Dublin Castle. From Dublin Castle, we go to the Bank of Ireland at College Green, and then we get to the Door. And our plan is, here's an outline of the route, our plan is to get here to Leinster House in time for 1:30. It gives us 2 hours to get from the beginning of the march to the end of the march. And the reason we want to be at Leinster House for 1:30 is because 2 o'clock is the start time, we understand, for the first meetings in the Irish Parliament after the recess. And what we're going to be doing is inviting as many TDs as we can to come out and meet us at the march outside the gates of the Dáil and participate in a photo shoot where they can show their support for the cause that we're raising awareness of. And also we're planning to video interview some of them and basically put their comments out on the internet and use that to raise awareness of what's going on. So that's why it's important that we leave the Four Courts by 11:30 to give us time to have a leisurely walk from Four Courts to Dublin Castle, to the Bank of Ireland at College Green, and then to Leinster House in time to get there comfortably by 1:30. And that, of course, includes time for the speeches along the way. At each one of the locations, we're going to have roughly 3 or maybe 4 people delivering short, punchy, hopefully powerful speeches about why they are involved in the march. Now, does anybody have any questions about any of the timings or the logistics before we move on to the next part of our meeting tonight? Anybody have any comments or questions? Any thoughts? All good? Okay. In which case, I'm going to move on to part number 2 before we then pass over to Maeve in about 10 minutes or so. What we've done is we have put together a little, very, very simple slideshow. It's a slideshow that does something very, very important, I think. It's a slideshow that captures the reasons why people are marching. And we know the reasons why people are marching because we quite literally asked people, why are you participating in the march? And this is what they said. We'll share that information with you. Okay, so when people registered to attend the march, they completed the sentence, I believe that enough is enough because, and then they put whatever words they thought appropriate. I'm going to scan my way through these and read them out, just to make sure you can all hear them and see them. And I might stop at a few places to develop particular points that are important. Here's the first one from one of you or somebody else who's attended the march who isn't here yet. I believe that enough is enough because the system is broken. You know that phrase, folks, the system is broken, is a phrase I'm hearing all the time. Maybe you are too. There generally does seem to be a complete lack of trust and confidence that the system, the establishment, the institutions are working as they should. I think that simple phrase really does capture the sentiment of a lot of people. The next one is, I believe that enough is enough because credit, very specific here, credit services are like the courts and misrepresenting themselves as beneficial owners, engaging in fraudulent concealment and intentional misrepresentation at the heart of their claims. That's clearly somebody who's got very specific life experience of what they see to have been going on. Very, very important commentary there. Another one says, I believe that enough is enough because the government and politicians have essentially abandoned the many tens of thousands of distressed mortgages left to fend for themselves against banks, vulture funds, and the strategic liars who act for them in Irish courts. I do believe that phrase, strategic liars, is a phrase that was used in the Finance Committee in January, if I remember rightly. Brian may well elaborate on that point when he speaks a little bit later. This sense of abandonment is very strong and very real. Let's look at what this person's saying. I believe that enough is enough because the government and politicians have essentially abandoned the many tens of thousands of distressed mortgages left to fend themselves against banks, vulture funds, and the strategic liars who act for them in Irish courts. That's powerful stuff. I believe that enough is enough because there has been widespread collapse in the trust and confidence people have in our institutions, including our financial regulators. Too many people are losing heart in the integrity of the system as a whole. That trust and confidence must be restored. Otherwise, the state of misery for literally millions will continue indefinitely. Enough is enough. Now, the claim that there are millions of people in misery, I do not think is an exaggeration. Because remember, it's not only the people themselves who've been directly impacted by the injustice, it's their family, it's their friends. At Transparency Task Force, we have, unfortunately, a lot of experience understanding just how much catastrophic carnage and mayhem is caused when, for example, somebody's home is repossessed. It's not just them that suffers, it's the family as a whole and its friends too. I believe that enough is enough because the state bodies set up to support citizens are not working for the people they are supposed to and are making personal gains from their positions of power. Next one. I believe that enough is enough because too many people have been pushed to suicide, homelessness, stress, and penury by banks and vulture funds. I believe that enough is enough because we've been silent for too long. Our voices need to be heard. I would like to speak to that one, please, because this sense of voices not being heard is a theme that's coming up all the time. However, our parliamentary systems are meant to work, whether we're talking about the UK or Ireland, or of course both, there is a very strong and very real sense of disenfranchisement, of disconnect. People feel their voices are not being heard. Or arguably even worse, people feel that their voices are being heard, but then ignored. And I don't know about you, but I personally feel that to be even worse. I believe that enough is enough because we need justice. The phrase "we need justice" is important. They're not saying they want justice, they need justice. So many people's lives have been absolutely ruined because of the miscarriage of justice that they've experienced, whatever it might be. And they can't move beyond it. They can't get a sense of closure. They can't get a sense of it's over and done with. Because excuse me for being so dramatic about it, the wound is still an open wound. It's a festering wound. It's a painful wound. They need justice. People need justice. I believe that enough is enough because the system, for example, the government, is actively, inverted commas, at war with the people. We, the people, are the masters and the government, our trustees, our servants. But through corruption, the government has proclaimed they're our masters. So enough is enough. This is powerful stuff, though. This is why we're marching. And that's why I'm running through these with everybody, to help everybody remember why we are doing what we're doing. I believe that enough is enough because there is no control over vulture funds, no control over vulture funds and associated bodies. The Irish government has no idea about what is happening, nor does it care about the goings on. I wonder if the Irish government does have no idea about what is happening, or is it perhaps, again, worse than that? Just in the same way that it's worse to be heard and ignored than just be not heard. Perhaps it's even worse if the government does know what's going on and is not responding to the call for help of the people. I wonder. I believe that enough is enough because the justice system is not fit for purpose. You'll only get justice if you can afford it. You know, folks, that is a phrase that comes up time and time again. This idea that if you haven't got deep pockets, if you can't battle in the courts, if you can't take on that Goliath because you're just, inverted commas, a David, if you cannot afford to get justice, then you won't get justice. That's a tragic state of affairs. Now, folks, you may or may not agree with everything that's being put up on these slides, but the important thing is this. Everybody who's written these words, we can only assume, absolutely believes them to be true. And whether it's a reality thing or it's just a perception thing really doesn't matter. What matters is this is what people truly believe. The justice system is not fit for purpose. You will only get justice if you can afford it. That might be a topic that Maeve picks up on when she speaks in a little while. Vulture funds are being protected by the courts and the government. I believe that enough is enough because the government support the banks who screw the citizens. You know what? In the UK, and I can only assume in Ireland as well, there are so many people that believe that the relationship between the banks and the government is so close and so interdependent, so cozy, if you like, that it causes real conflicts of interest. So much so that government cannot function successfully without the willful support of the banks. One of our members, Mark Bannister, has written what I believe to be a very good paper that talks about this issue. It talks about the idea that the banks and the government have a mutually dependent relationship, which means that if the banks are doing something wrong, the government doesn't always chase them down and demand the justice that they should be demanding on behalf of the people. Powerful stuff. I believe that enough is enough because the country is being run by incompetent people who are not running the country in the interest of the general population. This is the kind of sentiment that's coming up everywhere, not just in Ireland, but believe you me, in the UK as well. Enough is enough because citizens are denied justice in the Irish family, civil and criminal courts. We've got some folks involved with the march who are very, very focused on this issue. The way that mothers in particular are being denied justice in the Irish family, civil and criminal courts. Another one here. Enough is enough because our constitutional rights are being ignored while total corruption is happening in our courts and country. I'm going to come back to that word corruption in a little while. Enough is enough because too many people have been let down by a system which seems predicated by greed. The system or people within the system seem unwilling or unable to change, so the push has to come from elsewhere. Otherwise, we are, in the words of Einstein, displaying the first signs of madness by doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. What a thoughtful comment. What a thoughtful comment. I'd like to draw your attention to one particular part of it, please. The system or people within the system. Now that's really, really interesting. The person that wrote it is recognizing that the system's not working. Is it because the system is such that it cannot work? Or is it, effectively, we are being asked, is it that the people running the system are the problem? It may well be that if the system was being run by the right kind of people, with the right kind of motives, the right kind of incentives, the right kind of values, the right kind of ethics, maybe the system would work perfectly. So is it the system that's fundamentally at fault, or is it that the system is not being worked properly by the people who've been given responsibility to run it? I believe that enough is enough because when enough is forensically examined, it exposes the truth and a commercial management culture that undermines the principles and the rules of law. I believe that enough is enough because the corruption is at epidemic levels, and too little, too late will be fatal. Too little, too late will be fatal. I had a conversation earlier today, folks. I'm not going to mention who or which organisation, but I had a conversation earlier, folks, with somebody in one of the institutions in Ireland, an important one, a relevant one. And during the course of this conversation, I found myself needing to talk about the human cost and suffering caused as a direct consequence of the kind of things that we are discussing right now. It is a true tragedy that many people in the UK have taken their lives as a consequence of the kind of things that we are talking about. I'm going to refer to a Transparency Task Force volunteer, Ian Davis, who took his life. I attended his funeral last year. What you're looking at here, folks, is what's called an early day motion. An early day motion is when politicians choose to make a formal statement in the UK Parliament. And it says, and I'll just read it out because the writing is quite small. This House records its great sadness at the sudden death of Ian Holland Davis from Dunshort, Fife, at the age of just 61 years. notes that Ian lost his entire life savings in the London capital finance scandal, and he became increasingly frustrated at the difficulties he then encountered in attempting to ensure that those responsible for the fraud were fully brought to justice, and that government departments and regulatory agencies should be quicker and more open in acknowledging their failings. Places on record a deep concern that these experiences appear to have been significant factors in Ian's tragic decision to end his own life. Commends the dedicated work he carried out as a volunteer for TTF to try and make sure other investors were better protected than he was. Further commends his courage in speaking publicly about how he became a victim of fraud, calls upon the government to ensure that all agencies involved in the fight against fraud are properly resourced and held to account for their performance in protecting innocent people from fraud, and sends its heartfelt condolences to Ian's family and friends as they come to terms with their loss. One of our members tells me he's aware of at least 70, not 17, 70 suicide attempts by people who've become victims of financial crime and banking misconduct, that sort of thing. These parliamentarians are British parliamentarians who co-signed that early day motion, that statement of concern, for want of a better phrase. But if you Google suicides in Ireland as a consequence of banking misconduct, there have been, it would seem, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, some even say thousands. This is why we're marching. This is why we're marching. Now, a lot of tonight's conversation is going to be about what we're doing and why we're doing it. But we have incorporated one sort of semi-technical, for want of a better phrase, semi-technical slot from Maeve Hosier. Maeve is somebody that the Transparency Task Force has had the pleasure and privilege to get to know in recent months. We rate Maeve extremely highly. She is the kind of person you find yourself wanting to listen to because she's full of very hard-earned insights and experiences. And Maeve's going to talk about a couple of topics, perhaps NAMA, perhaps Article 6, and maybe other things, which she believes to be the reasons why she's part of this community and part of the community that's going to be marching in Dublin on the 18th of September. Can I please invite everybody, first of all, to put their hands together and thank Maeve for preparing this session. And Maeve, when you're ready to, please feel free to share your screen and walk us through your slide. Thank you very much indeed, Maeve. Thank you.
Thank you, first of all, Andy, for that very warm introduction. And thank you for having me along this evening. I'm going to talk, first of all, if I may, on the topic of NAMA. I think that's what you originally asked me if I would talk about, but I'm more than happy to continue the conversation on regarding Article 6, because so much of what you have spoken about so far, Andy, engages Article 6, the right to a fair trial, the inequality of arms, which so many victims of banking fraud have experienced. So perhaps that's something we could maybe return to. But for now, I'm going to focus on NAMA. And the title of my presentation this evening, which I hope you can now see, is From Tiger to Eagle. So I'm going to just briefly revisit the background to the collapse of the Irish economy in 2008. Look at the establishment of NAMA, which was a major part of the supposed solution to the problem. Look at some of NAMA's purpose and functions and just one or two sections of the relevant legislation. We look at what happened to bad loans, as they're referred to, which were acquired by NAMA. And there we're looking at the portfolio of bad property loans, which the banks had acquired and which had become toxic on their books. And then I'm going to finish off looking at the very, very controversial sale of the final tranche of assets by NAMA, which is known as Project Eagle. So Just from the beginning, as you're no doubt all more than too aware at this point, we experienced a financial collapse in 2008 in Ireland. And the commentators and analysts are pretty much agreed the failure of the banking sector really came about as a result of an overexposure to the property market, and in particular to a small number of individuals. It's estimated around 20 individuals were very, very significant in the events that led to the subsequent collapse of the economy. That gave rise to the bailout, which was agreed with entities including the IMF, ECB, and others. And also part of the solution was to take these bad debts from the bank's books to buy them at what was referred to as a haircut, and that's at a significant discount, to take them into the control of NAMA, a so-called bad bank. This was the National Assets Management Agency. I'm not going to dwell too much here. Maybe I could share the slides at the end for those who maybe want to look into this a little further, and just outlining there, the perceived, I think, wisdom with regard to the cause of the problem. And from my own perspective, I've looked at the activities of what I have referred to as an unholy trinity of actors, those being lawyers, bankers, and property developers, and looked at how these three players together created the problem. Now, and a little bit more details there in relation to the bailout. So as I say, NAMA was part of the solution. It was going to allow the banks to get on with business as usual without these toxic loans on their books. And the state was going to take over the problem by creating the bad bank NAMA. So they established it by means of the 2009 NAMA Act. The purposes of NAMA were set out in Section 2, and they were, as we've said, to address the serious threat to the economy, the stability of credit institutions in the state generally, and the need for the maintenance and stabilization of the financial system. Amongst other purposes was to facilitate the availability of credit in the economy of the state, to protect the interests of taxpayers, also to remove uncertainty about the valuation and location of certain assets of credit institutions of systemic importance to the economy. So its functions then were to acquire these bad assets and to manage them, to take all steps necessary to protect, enhance, or realize the value of the bank assets that they had acquired. And also, it was part of its function to ensure the disposal of loans or portfolios of loans in the market for the best achievable price. Now, the legislation is complex, so we can only briefly skim the surface. One section which jumped out at me was Section 216, whereby it's established that neither NAMA nor the NAMA group entity shall be taken to be providing a service or carrying on an activity which would require it to be authorised or regulated by the central bank. So this, I think, is quite significant in where we find ourselves today in terms of the problems. Another important feature for those of you who may not be aware is that in accordance with the 172 subsection 3 of the Act, a person who is a debtor, for example, one of these property developers who had got into difficulty with his portfolio of loans, he cannot buy back his own loans from NAMA at the reduced price. Okay, so that was sort of built into the legislation as well. So what happened to these bad loans? Well, according to the former, I think, CEO, Brendan McDonough, over 90% of the assets have since been acquired by private equity funds, such as Cerberus. Now, let's look at the sale of the last portfolio of loans, which has become so very, very controversial. According to the Comptroller and Auditor General, NAMA incurred a net loss of almost £500 million in terms of this portfolio sale. That's disputed. However, this tranche of loans has been the subject of an investigation by, amongst others, the National Crime Agency. Now, it's important to note the value of the portfolio is 1.24 billion approximately. So this is a lot of assets here that we are dealing with. Now, there have been allegations made in both the Northern Ireland Assembly, those allegations also having been repeated in the Oireachtas. And here I have an article from RTE News which refers to the allegations, and essentially it was alleged that there was corruption and fraud associated with the sale of this portfolio of assets known as Project Eagle. So that was in and around 2015 that these revelations were made, and they were made in quite a controversial way at the time. So following on from that, in 2022, two individuals have been formally arraigned on charges associated with the sale of Project Eagle. A 78-year-old individual, Frank Cushnahan, was charged. I believe he may have been 80 years old or even 81 in 2022 when formally arraigned on the charge of fraud, contrary to Section 1 of the Fraud Act, involving failure to disclose information. He had a co-accused, that is Mr. Ian Coulter. He's also jointly charged with a count of fraud under the same section. However, Mr. Coulter is also further charged with a further count of fraud, in fact, several other counts of fraud. Now, no trial date has been issued for the two individuals. And I think it's very important for us to note that they have both denied all charges, and that it's important for us to note that this evening. And that's, of course, taking account of the fact that everyone has a right to a fair trial. Now, these individuals, their trial seems to be subject to considerable delay, which would, of course, create an issue if it doesn't take place in the somewhat near future, I think, given the age of the individuals and the delay. So meanwhile, back in Dublin, we have our own investigation, which is taking a very, very, very long time. It doesn't appear to have sufficient resources at its disposal. So that seems to be constantly kicking the can down the road as far as that investigation being carried out there by Ireland's Commission of Investigation into NAMA. So I'm going to leave it at that, Andy. Thank you so much, everyone, for your attention. Any questions, of course, delighted to take them. Thank you.
May, thank you very much indeed. And if you do get those slides across to me, I'll be very, very pleased to circulate them. You've put a lot of very helpful content in there, and I'm remarkably grateful to you for doing so. Folks, before we put some comments or questions to May, can I please invite everybody to once again show our appreciation to May for preparing that session. It was very, very informative, and I see you've got some references at the end for those of us that want to kind of dive into the detail. May, thank you so much. That was a very, very, very good account of NAMA. Article 6, just briefly, can you tell us why Article 6 is relevant in the space we're talking about tonight? Thank you very much, May. Thank you.
Andy, with regard to Article 6, it's something that we have identified that many victims of financial misconduct have really had a very raw deal in terms of their right to a fair trial. At the heart of that is the inequality of arms. So, this is, extremely problematic. The banks have such deep pockets, and the individuals are, by the very nature of their situation, going through difficulties financially. So, they're simply prevented due to this inequality of arms. And there's, some case law at the level of the European Court of Human Rights, which supports the idea that where you have this inequality of arms, it can constitute a breach of Article 6. So that's one thing. Also, lack of disclosure of the relevant documentation also seems to be an ongoing theme. Okay, so this is another way in which it becomes impossible for the individual to have access to justice, because they're not able to access the relevant documents from the bank to ensure that they can put their case across. Okay, so these interestingly are some themes which we saw emerging over in the post office inquiry in recent times, where the individuals found it very difficult to access justice. And I think we see some common threads emerging there in terms of the difficulties. But maybe just to touch back on one further part of the convention, which I think really we have to maybe just give a passing mention to this evening, given some of the heart-wrenching stories that you have flagged up to us this evening, and which many of us are aware from our own work in this field. The level of suicides and the level of psychological harm, and what I'm increasingly beginning to ask myself is, to what extent is Article 3 of the convention engaged here? And this prohibits inhuman and degrading treatment. And I think what many people are going through constitutes inhuman and degrading treatment. And this might be something that we might want to perhaps have a conversation around also. Okay,
yes,
so on that, I suppose that those are just some thoughts. Andy, over to you.
Maeve, once again, thank you very much indeed. You always give us lots to think about, and you've done it again tonight. Thank you. Much appreciated. Much appreciated. Folks, in a moment, I'm going to ask some individuals who very kindly step forward and share their thoughts to do so. In more or less this order, we'll go to Brian, then to Tony, Brian Riley, Tony Lawler, Seamus May. Seamus, so nice to see you, sir. It's been a while. Great to see you, Seamus. Thank you. Cormac Butler, Theo McDonald, Byron. And then anybody else that wants to. I don't want to limit it to those folks. I'm sure Hubert would like to share some thoughts as well, plus anybody else that wants to. But before I do that, I want to talk to you about a speech that occurred in 2016. It's an important speech. It's an important speech because it's a speech from a senior official within the UK's bank, the Bank of England. I'm going to tell you why I believe this speech to be so important. So I'm going to share my screen. So it's a speech that has had quite an impact on me. The speech was called The Great Divide by Andy Haldane, who was top economist at the Bank of England. No more, he's moved on to other things. And as I said, it's 2016. It's about the great divide between not only financial elites, but also elites generally and the wider society. He discusses the crucial role finance plays in society and why, the progress made so far in restoring trust, and what further progress might be needed to narrow the trust deficit. And you can download the speech. And there's a particular bit about it. I'm not going to refer to the whole speech here, but there's a particular part of the speech from the 18th of May 2016 that I want to draw to your attention, because it's such a strong point, and because it's coming from the Bank of England, it's really important. The speech talks about some feedback the bank received when it was doing some work, some open forums, when it was inviting people to share their opinions. I'm going to read from just here, okay? The most important and compelling message the bank received at the open forum came in the first session. The bank had conducted some polling of perceptions of the financial sector, for example, by asking people what one word best described the future of financial markets. Among the bank's usual contacts, including those in the financial sector, the most used word was regulated. Many of us will have heard that message from financial insiders concerned about the perils of overzealous regulators. But for me, Andy Haldane speaking here, for me, the more revealing responses came from the general public. from the customers rather than the producers of financial services. The word most used by them when describing financial markets was a rather different one. It was corrupt. Not far behind were words like manipulated, self-serving, destructive, and greedy. I'm sure that many of you have heard those messages too. They are certainly ones I've encountered frequently on my visits around the country. And he goes on to talk about what could and should be done by the Bank of England and others to try to restore trust and confidence in the financial system in the UK. I think that if the Bank of Ireland were to have done a similar exercise, it would probably have come up with a similar conclusion. So what we've got here, folks, is a profound disconnect that nobody can be comfortable with. Surely that nobody can become comfortable with. We have, as per my earlier comments, many, many, many people feeling the system is corrupt, that they're being denied access to justice, that there's a David versus Goliath battle, that the government is somehow complicit in supporting the bank's agenda, etc., etc., etc. And we have an industry, the financial services sector, which to function successfully must be trusted. How can the Bank of England in the UK, or how could the Central Bank of Ireland be comfortable with the current state of affairs? It does not make any sense to me that there is inadequate attention being placed on the massive trust deficit in the UK and in Ireland's financial services sector. And it does not make any sense to me that things are and have been allowed to be as bad as they are. Now, shortly, I'll be inviting Brian, then Tony, then Seamus, then Cormac, then Theo, Byron, and others to share their thoughts about why things are as bad as they are. And when we get to Byron, I've never seen the book that you place a link to in the chat. That looks like a really good book. And I read the back page, the piece you put in the chat, Byron, and it does occur to me that if Ireland's economy was kind of advertised as a light touch regulatory environment, it will have invited all the kind of bad actors and all the kind of bad cultures that have manifested in the problems that we're now experiencing. So Byron, when it gets to yourself, please do share further thoughts about that book, and we'll definitely reach out to the authors. It looks like a very relevant book to our cause. Mr. Brian Riley, the topics we're discussing tonight, I'm aware of topics that you are unfortunately very, very familiar with on a personal level. Could you please tell us whatever you think you want to tell us about why we're marching in Dublin on the 18th of September? And what we'll do in the last roughly 20 minutes or so, folks, is we'll be having a conversation about what we can do to raise awareness of the march and to attract others to attend. Thank you very much, Brian. So just focusing on why the march is happening and your take on the issues that we've covered today. What would you like to say, Brian? Thank you.
Well, if I may, and thank you, Andy. You know, our mutual friend Paddy, we don't need a surname, but
Sure.
He's very fond of saying that things happen for a reason.
It is.
And I think this evening is a perfect example of that, because there are many tremendous, and this is a compliment coming your way, Andy, but there are numerous tremendous people, some of them on the call here and others that we know about, who've contributing to this movement, if you like, or this endeavor to seek justice. Now, what you've put together in this structure, I think, is commendable, and it's fantastic. And I want to thank you for that, because I can see the value of it as it's building and building towards what we aim to do on the 18th and also on the 19th with Theo. I'd also like to congratulate, while I'm on, Maeve for that presentation. I'm glad, Maeve, that it's recorded, because we'll certainly get an opportunity to share it. And I'm sure the aforementioned Paddy would be very interested in it, for one. Here's my contribution, right? So when I thought, you read out one of mine earlier, because I did fit in that, here's the reason we're going, or why. But it just struck me, there's 3 no's. I just scribbled this down here this evening. We've no legal aid, which is a real strategic thing on their part. So you have this inequality of arms that Maeve mentioned as well. So there's no equality of arms. There's no class actions available to us, and there's no legal aid. So we're hamstrung from that point of view. The government have turned a blind eye to what's been going on, and I'm mindful that people are left alone. I remember saying to Ed Honohan, actually, on the way, I said, how could this possibly be, this level of collusion between mainstream media, for instance, the government, the courts, the people acting, the strategic liars that was referred to earlier, acting on behalf of the vulnerables? How could that possibly be? And he said to me, it's much worse than that. It's corrupt. The system is corrupted. So that's why we have to tackle this. I think what we plan to do on September 18th is, as you've rightly pointed out, a really good step in the right direction. I've personally seen, and Byron and others will be aware of this, I've seen judges saying to barristers who are trying to represent people, and also to lay litigants, when they're reminded about European law and European directives and forbearance and or consumer rights, they actually have on occasion shouted down, so what? You got the money, you didn't pay it back, and under the bus you go. And now, thankfully, just on a positive note, I have mentioned on an earlier call that the same Ed Honohan has remarked that there may be some reason to believe that the tide is turning, and that a number of judges, and certainly if we get our press release out, we get our little march, and we have Theo's report to focus on the 19th in Leinster House. And by the way, anybody on this call who's interested in attending that on the morning of the 19th, just get in touch with Andy or get in touch with me by direct mail, and we'll make sure you're on the list for the invitation. So I think that's it, Andy. I think it was contrived. Started Michael Noon, these people came of the very on need deal with it on their own, because that's how they borrowed the money. It was an average broke down, and they've maintained that position to this day. So thank you, sir, for your input into this, and for putting your hand up and going to New York that time. That was the first giant step.
Brian, thank you very much indeed.
Over and out.
Thank you very, very much indeed. And your kind compliments about what the team are doing for this march are really, really appreciated. We are putting a lot of time and effort into it because we believe in it. And the reason we believe in it is because of what you tell us and what Seamus tells us and what Tony tells us and Cormac and everyone else tells us is going on there. Anybody with a little bit of decency, would be motivated to do what you can to try to make a difference. And given the fact that we're not being properly listened to, it makes complete sense to take to the streets. Brian Wiley, thank you very much indeed. Mr. Tony Lawler, please, you've got a few minutes, sir, to share with us what really matters to you about what we're doing and why we're doing it. What would you like to say, Tony? We'll then go to Seamus, mate, and then to Cormac. Tony.
Thanks, Andy. I just want to pick up a little bit on what Brian has said. I don't know, can you see my picture up? I'm not on screen.
Yeah. We can see you. We can see that you're holding up some paper. That's right.
Now, these are 5 High Court decisions that were made in the last 12 months, which there are certain little paragraphs within them five judgments that were handed down that Byron has isolated, and they make very, very interesting commentary that we should get and we should attach to anything that we are doing going forward. Like the disconnect that was referred to between the courts and the legislature. This highlights it. The strategic liars that was pointed out by Ed O'Honohan at the Finance Committee meeting. What's in these judgments shows clearly that these people are strategic liars. We should be taking and isolating that commentary and putting it as a focus to why enough is enough. Because I have in my room here 5 judgments that clearly points to what, like, in order to prove fraud, you have to prove intention, because it's a criminal offence. Now, I know from reading them judgments, there certainly is a perception. There's no doubt there's a perception of fraud there. And I think we should be taking the commentary of these judges that identifies lies and strategic lies being told in court. And we should be using that. We should be using that as a stick to beat these people with. Like, we have every right to put these people to full proof if there are claims been made against us. And that's what we should be doing. And the disconnect is all compounded by inequity of arms, by, like, that, what Brian is after saying there about you got the money, you have to pay it back. Like, that argument has been put to bed for months now, for over a year now. That's just not cutting ice anymore. That the likes of that argument, just as the conclusivity of Section 31 of the Registration of Titles Act, that's not cutting the mustard anymore. We should be taking all these things. We should be putting them in a little sort of portfolio. We should be giving all this commentary to our politicians. I know that I have discussed this at length with John McGuinness, and I can say, now, I'm not going to speak for him, but from what I can gather, he certainly will be asking questions. He certainly will be asking questions in line with these judgments that are being handed down. What are our legislators doing about it? Our legislators, what are they doing about it? There's information coming from the courts that there's lies been told, that there's fraudulent papers been put into work, to prove claims, and we need to latch onto that. That's all I have to say, Andy, on the issue.
Tony, thank you very much indeed, sir. Your passion for this cause and your ability to connect with important people like John McGuinness, Chair of the Finance Committee, it's so important. Great that you're part of this community and this endeavour, Tony. Great to have you with us. Thank you very, very much indeed. Mr. Seamus May, Seamus, you know me well enough to know that I frequently say to everybody on me how good you are at what you do, talking about exposing kleptocracy and, frankly, corruption in the system. Seamus, I'm also mindful of the fact that your journey has been, like a lot of people's, long and horrendously tough, and that it ain't getting any easier. Seamus, you have a few minutes, sir, to share with us what you'd like to before we go to Cormac, then Theo, then Byron, and others. And then we'll spend the last 15, 20 minutes or so talking about what we can do to collectively raise awareness. Seamus, what would you like to say today? Thank you.
Thank you, Andy, for your kind words. Yes, I have a lifetime spent fighting, probably 25 years prior to initiating court action, which is now in my court case is 28 years old. And so I go back before the financial crash. I go back, much, much longer, to the 70s, really. And, I know from my activities over the years that every sinew of our country is corrupted. And I don't necessarily mean all brown envelopes. I talk a lot about legal corruption, which to me is the big issue. I am in court now 28 years. I've had to take the last few months off because I became quite ill. They can only suggest that it was a really nasty virus, but I'm just knocked out completely, and I've now been away for 3 weeks and I'm just returning. So forgive me for not being is involved and should have been for the last few months. Somebody mentioned earlier in one of the reasons for the justice, do the government know what's going on? Yes, of course they do. They know intimately what's going on. Is the actual government? No. Our governments are merely puppets, and they're puppets for what we all know from the World Economic Forum to the WHO and Davos and Bilderberg. And the problem is that the vast majority of our TVs simply don't care, because they are whipped by the puppet that's leading the party and whoever he's leading it for. So it is very difficult. I worked very hard at the Dáil or the Parliament for all these years. Just to be really made a fool out of. People tell you they're going to do this and that and the other, but they go upstairs and the answer is no. In my experience, the justice system in Ireland is completely dysfunctional. It is biased very heavily towards the state and large corporations and those with money. Equality of arms, in my own case, now I had to fight with the banks, but that was going back maybe 30 years ago now, when we were put out of our house and orders for my arrest and imprisonment all around and everything. That was at the behest of the large corporate in Ireland, CRH, Cement Rolls, Sun Holdings. So my experience more laterally with the courts, of course, is not about the vulture funds and the receivers and the banking and that. It's competition law. And, my family had been made a complete fool of. With 28 years done equality of arms. One of the corporates that we're dealing with had always had cross directorships in all the banks, and we have been blacklisted for over 30 years by the banks. The European Commission knows that. It's part of their findings in a 1994 judgment against the cement sector. Failure to make available documentation, i.e. discovery. Well, we got the most laughable discovery judgment back in 2002, which it took the Supreme Court 30 seconds to give judgment on the appeal. My own lawyer, a well-respected lawyer, said it was a corrupt judgment. I have no doubt it was a judgment designed to make us fail. So they know very well. But the problems with banks and my own issues with competition law, and like, if you look at my case going back over all these years, the Irish state here and the judiciary have driven a coach and horses through so many European laws. And in their last judgment, what they just received from the Court of Appeal, they tell me that they have broken no European law. Boldly tell me in the judgment that they have broken, when they actually have broken a whole host of them. But that leads on to the whole breakdown in society. We can't just look at this as the banking issues or the say the corporate and competition issues for the big guys, pick out the small guys. I mean, it's across the board, and we don't have a democracy. If the people that don't vote did vote, we may possibly be just about able to, return some democracy to the equation. But now, no. And, for me, the next election is going to be no different from what has all gone before. And that's not taken from any one of us here who's doing all this work and making all the efforts and that. But it is a huge mountain to climb. And look, I'm with you all the way, and hopefully I'm back for good now. So that's really the most of what I had to say. But sorry, the third party funding, of course. The proof of the pudding with the third party funding is that the minister brought in third party funding for international arbitrations. Now, people involved in international arbitrations don't need third party funding. It's us, it's ordinary people that need third party funding. And the other thing that I find, which could be huge, particularly say in my line, is contingency fees. Contingency fees are prohibited in Ireland. And I would have lawyers absolutely dying to set up a contingency fee arrangement with me in terms of our proposed case against the state. So it's very, very hopeless, very, very hopeless at the moment. So listen, best of luck to everybody.
Seamus, thank you very much indeed for sharing your thoughts. And folks, please do, if you've not seen it or watched it, please make sure you click on that link I put in the chat just now, the talk that Seamus gave about Ireland democracy or corpocracy. It's absolutely first class. And when you hear somebody like Seamus May with his kind of background and insights talk about the governments are merely puppets, when you watch that, you'll completely understand where Seamus is coming from. Seamus, you will have noticed in the chat, I'm sure, that Brian's put a thumbs up. Great to see you back in action. We know that you've gone through several terrible, terrible months recently, and you're having to, not through choice, but through necessity, continue the fight despite the unfairness of the situation. Could I please invite everybody to show their appreciation to Seamus, because he's a relentless fighter and he's come back from something pretty damn tough, and we just are so pleased that you're back in the fold, Seamus, able to participate as much as you can or as much as you want to. Thank you, Seamus.
Thanks, Andy, and thanks, Brian, and thanks to everybody. Yeah, I hopefully have the shoulder to wheel from now on.
Thank you. And remember, but don't worry if you can't, what you've already done is more than anybody could be asked to do. Thank you, Seamus. Cormac Butler, I think of Cormac in a very similar way to Maeve, so full of knowledge and insights and details. Cormac, you've got a few minutes, sir, to tell us whatever you think you want to tell us about this march, why we're doing it, why it's important, and anything you want to cover off, then we'll go to Theo. Thank you, Cormac.
Okay. Thank you, Andy. I'll just focus on some of the points that Brian, Tony, and Seamus have made. I can understand why there's a bit of pessimism taking on the courts, but we have made some progress. Firstly, in the area of the Registration of Titles Act, we have made progress in the sense that judges, in theory, should no longer regard land registry evidence as proof of ownership, and that has been established in the Fannin case. So that's there without doubt. The second area that we've made progress on is redacted documents. This is where vulture funds can no longer use the registration of title as proof of ownership, and therefore they rely on redacted documents. And in some cases, the judges have overturned those redacted documents. They want the full documents, but not all the judges have done that. So one area we can make progress on is in the last week, I obtained a copy of a mortgage sale agreement, and that sets out very clearly the warranties that banks make when they sell loans to the vulture funds. And because these banks have been in breach of company law, they have broken a number of warranties, and therefore the sales are, in theory, invalid. So therefore, we can use that as an excuse to get the full unredacted documents that the vulture funds rely on to prove that they're now the new owners of the loans. Regarding Brian's point that you borrow the money and therefore you have to pay it back, that's obviously an oversimplification. What judges should be doing is saying when people borrowed in 2008 or between 2005 and 2010, the banks knew that a crisis was coming. Whereas the individuals did not. And the reason why the banks knew that a crisis was on the way was because in 2005, they adopted an accounting standard which allowed banks to hide losses. And if they hide losses, they're not in compliance with the European solvency requirements. And case law in Ireland has established that if banks are not in compliance with European solvency requirements, then there is contributory negligence. So bearing in mind what Maeve has been saying about NAMA, National Asset Management Agency, in 2010 and 2012, they were buying loans at a 60% discount. So therefore, when a judge says to you, you borrow the money and therefore you should pay it back, you could easily say to the judge, there is contributory negligence. We have no problems with paying the money back, but we're not going to pay for the contributory negligence that the bank has suffered because of them deciding to break the law. And if the judge attempts to disagree, there is a case called BCM versus KBC Bank versus BCM. And the judge made very clear that if a bank is in breach of the solvency requirements and has lost money, then it must identify the contributory negligence. So there are 3 points I think we should work on to ensure that even the most corrupt of judges is given as little wriggle room as possible. They're fairly simple points, they're not overly complicated, but I do think you should get those points across to the judge. So focus on the contributory negligence, focus on the warranties that the Vulture Funds has issued, and focus on the fact that if they turn up with land registry documents, tell them they're wasting their time. And that should put it should certainly get a judgment from summary to plenary, in which case the banks will have to provide witnesses, and we'll have an opportunity to cross-examine those witnesses. One practical issue that we should focus on before the march on 18th of September is to try and decide what message we are going to get across. I raised the issue of company law, and I spoke to it with a journalist about an hour ago. He's a mainstream journalist, and he said there's nothing corrupt about the newspapers or media not wanting to cover company law. It's just that they don't understand it, and it makes a very boring story for the lay public. There is probably an element of truth in that, and rather than avoid the argument, we have to simplify it. We simply have to say that if banks decide not to comply with company law and they suffer losses because of their own contributory negligence, can the courts make the borrower responsible for those losses? And I think unless the judge is 100% corrupt and very stupid, he might say, well, the contributory negligence is the customer's problem, it's not the bank's problem. So we don't want to give the judges real room. It's not that all judges are corrupt, but there's quite a lot of incompetence there. So we don't want to give any wriggle room, but we do have to get a message across. I'm wondering, and I've just opened this to anyone who is better qualified at dealing with the media than I am, should we raise the company law issue, or should we try to keep the story simpler? That's all I'd like to say for the moment. Thanks.
Cormac, thank you for two things. Firstly, the knowledge that you bring and share at these kind of conversations is absolutely first class. You really do knock it out of the park every single time with something new and something insightful, so very, very important. And the question you just posed about whether we ought to raise the issue of company law in the narrative of the media is a really important question, and one we can come back to when we have the Q&A bit. Cormac, thank you very, very much. Talking about the media, we're now going to go to Theo, then to Byron. Theo, please, if you don't mind, take a moment to briefly introduce yourself and talk about whatever you'd like to share with us.
Yeah, not all the media are bad. Some of them are good. You're looking at one of them, hopefully, unless you get to know me, and then you might change your opinion. But yeah, I'm in the offices here of the Irish Independent, so I suppose it is considered a mainstream publication. So it's just, we just want to provide some hope and let everyone in the call know that there are people within the mainstream orbit, I suppose, who are on your side and understand your plight. Other people in this office as well, like Charlie Weston as well, who has tirelessly advocated for many of the causes, the sort of the unique causes that many people in this call have. He has been an advocate for that as well. And I just want to thank everyone for being here today. I just want to say that I hope this movement becomes a sort of wider movement to affect and initiate the change that we would like to see in society, particularly as it relates to financial services. But I think when we talk about change, we talk about change in a sort of vacuum, and there's sort of a void, because everyone can talk about change. We all want change in life. But I think we all acknowledge that for many years, ordinary people have been left at the mercy of unrestrained speculative forces of capital that in many ways seek to exploit ordinary people. It's been touched on already by Maeve's brilliant PowerPoint, which will be very, which I will include in my report that will be presented in mid-September. But I just want to touch a bit on the ins and outs of that report as it relates to some of the steps taken post-crash to deal with the resultant property bubble bursting. I think in many ways, governments across the world, particularly in Ireland, sought to blame the wider public for the profligacy of the housing bubble. And I think everyone in this call is educated enough and aware enough to know that ordinary people were mere pawns in this scheme and were in fact victims of the housing bubble. The public were expected to bail out unscrupulous banks and financial institutions to the tune of over 60 billion euro and suffer grueling austerity to pay for that bailout. Indeed, in the meantime, the Irish state was busy selling millions upon millions of assets, such as people's homes, the homes that they live in, where they want to form families in, where they want to have experiences in, over to mainly US private equity vulture funds through NAMA in order to revalue property prices following their fall. Now, this had the effect of making people beholden not to the banks that they thought they were mortgaged with, but to faceless foreign investment funds who treat housing not as a public good, but as a private asset meant purely for financial gain. Yep. 10 years later, Ireland is in the grip of a housing crisis that I'm sure we're all aware of. Since 2013, at the start of the so-called recovery from the financial crash, rents have risen by 90%. I mean, think about it. That is a huge figure. And house prices have risen by over 75%. And this has not resulted in an increase in wages. In fact, wages have risen by a measly 27%. As a young person, I will never know anytime soon the value of moving out of my parents' home anytime soon. I, like over 400,000 young people in Ireland, are stuck between either living at home or paying sky-high rents, all to satisfy the yield of cash-strapped funds who flaunt and brag about how expensive Ireland is on their websites. This precarious predicament faced by my cohort has inspired me to put pen to paper and advocate for the voiceless. Having written various opinion pieces on the phenomenon of generation rent and unscrupulous capital accumulation by major financial institutions at the expense of youth mobility, I was approached by Brian Riley, who's in this call, of Right to Homes, to produce a report that seeks to explore and analyse the cause of the current crisis and what needs to happen now. Part of this process has involved liaising with groups like Transparency Task Force, a group I think is dedicated to advocating for the little guy or gal left to the mercy of unregulated financial services or institutions. I hope in the coming days we can kind of build momentum for the upcoming protest, and instead of whining about our dire straits, we actually advocate and bring forward tangible solutions to this crisis and try to finally right the wrongs of financial malfeasance. So I just want to thank all the participants again for enduring my ranting and raving here today. And I wish all the attendees and the supporters the very best of luck. And I feel like I'm in the presence of greatness here, just with all the enthusiasm and the passion that people have brought forward. And I don't think my contribution can do justice to what I've heard here today, but I tried my best, and I hope you all can make it to the launch of my report in Leinster House. It won't be actually in the chamber, so you won't be face-to-face with some of these politicians, although you might be face-to-face with some of them if they decide to show up at the chamber, which is just adjacent to the actual parliamentary chamber. So thank you again, and
fantastic.
God bless.
Yeah, fantastic. We are so blessed to have you as part of the team. We really are so blessed to have you as part of the team. Yeah, well done. It's been putting in a shed load of work, folks, and it's very, very important report. A report designed to ask the questions that need to be asked and put forward the ideas that need to be considered properly by the parliamentarians in Ireland. Theo,
and if you guys can't make it, hopefully we may record the proceedings, or I hope to or intend to place the report maybe on my Substack after the politicians have pretended to read it or whatever. So you won't be left out if you can't make it.
Yeah, thank you very much, and we'll keep you posted, folks, through Theo, through Brian, about that very important session on the morning after the march. Theo, thank you very, very much indeed. Thank you. We'll go to Byron. Byron, for those of you that don't know Byron, works day in, day out, along with his wife, dealing with people who are at the front line of this battle that we've got on with the dodgy institutions. Byron, please share with us whatever you'd like to. And of course, if you want to, make reference to that book that I've never seen before that I think looks like one that's definitely worth taking a look at. Byron, over to you.
It's a very good book. It's an eye-opener that I think everyone in this group should read. Ironically, you can't buy it in Ireland. You have to buy it in the UK from a company called Pluto Print. Very reasonable price. I think they just print as they need, and books are ordered. the biggest, let's call it washing money through Ireland are pawn sites, believe it or not. They are the number one for washing money through Ireland, rather fitting for a Catholic country. On the Facebook page, The Hub Ireland, I often put up a narrative about the book and post different pages I think is hard-hitting and relevant, because everybody should read the book. It should be on the school curriculum. So that's that. Talking about who knows what. Back in 2023, I contacted the Finance Committee and informed them of effectively what's going on. I said I had 90 odd documents. So what they did was they set up a separate drive away from the Finance Committee computer, and I uploaded 92 files, which lays out all the different banks, how they're securitizing, how they're getting their ratings, the whole 9 yards. Eventually, we got a letter back to say that they were investigating, and that was in 2023. So what I can do here is upload and do it. Hopefully this will work. There you go. And this one here.
This is looking really interesting, Byron.
Well, those were sent to the Finance Committee by myself and a friend of mine that we just hooked up to do a bit of research. And it outlines the situation, who's who, what's what. And to be quite honest, it's, from what I can see, fallen on deaf ears. Now that the Finance Committee has said that we're looking into it, they'll have no more communications with me. So that's the state of Ireland, I'm afraid.
They'll have no more communications with you because they're looking into the matter that you brought to their attention.
Yeah. Yep. Their policy is that once they've accepted the paperwork and they're looking into it, then that's it. No more communications with myself.
Interesting. Well, presumably there's nothing to stop somebody else, me, inquiring about what's happening. Well, we'll talk further about that, Byron. We'll talk further about that. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Anything else, Byron?
No, the courts are on holiday, so we're fairly quiet. They're back in, I think, 2 weeks' time. So, and if you go on courts.ie and the legal diary and pick any registrar's court and just skim down it, the amount of vulture funds that have people in court is phenomenal. And then you look at the year, and they're all very, very recent. My opinion on that is that everything that's been sold, there's no liquidities left. The only thing that's left is the family home, and the vulture funds now want them. I suppose the other thing is, now, I put a link up to our High Court case, and paraphrasing cut to the chase here, Benchy said it doesn't matter that the mortgage is owned by a third party. It doesn't matter that you can't redeem your mortgage. You borrowed the money, you have to pay it back, and it doesn't matter who you pay it back to. If anyone wants a laugh, I would have a read of the judgment against ourselves. Pepper don't actually use that ruling in the courts very often. And I think they realise it's just so bad that they would be a laughing stock. But maybe not, maybe. In December of this year, Mars Capital have bought our loans, in brackets, and they're going to the Circuit Court to change the paperwork to Mars Capital and to go for an eviction order on that day. I'm actually, sounds mad, I'm actually looking forward to the day. We have a load of stuff in our arsenal to combat these guys. So we'll keep you posted on that one.
Fantastic. Byron, thank you very much indeed. Folks, the documents that have been put in the chat, including the documents that Byron just put in the chat, to be able to access them after the event, click on download. They'll then be downloaded to your computer and you'll then be able to access them. Okay. Byron, thank you very much indeed. You've given me reason to want to talk to you further and discuss the Finance Committee's position on the matters that you've raised. Really interesting. Folks, I'm going to invite others to participate in the conversation as we kind of open up to Q&A. We have a Terry McMahon with us. Terry, I'm really pleased that you're with us, sir. I'm going to first ask Hubert to say anything that Hubert would like to say, and then it would be absolutely great, Terry, if you wouldn't mind, to share your thoughts, please, sir, on anything that you would like to do so. Folks, I am recording the session and we will be putting it out on social media. I did say that at the beginning of the session, so you don't need to record it individually. I'll be putting it out as soon as Alexander finishes the editing ASAP. And Byron, I've put a note in the chat. Alexander will reach out to the authors of that book that you kindly mentioned, and we'll see if we can rust up an event with them as soon as possible. We've run dozens of events about books, and that looks like a particularly good one to squeeze in ASAP. Thank you, Byron. Can I go to Hubert and then we'll go to Mr. Terry McMahon, please? Hubert, anything you'd like to share with us? Thank you. Yes, please, Hubert. Please take yourself off mute and be as succinct as you can before we then get to Terry. Thank you. Hubert, so you're you're looking for the microphone icon at the bottom left of your Zoom screen. That's what you need to click on to get yourself unmuted. Gotcha. Perfect. Great to have you with us, Hubert. Please do fire away. You always speak directly, sir. Don't change the habit of a lifetime. We go for it. Thanks, Hubert.
First of all, I've got to thank Maeve Hosea for a very succinct, very clear message on the financial mess that we're all in. I go back to 2005. I'm in for several million. To Danske Bank in Belfast, who have pulled every trick that I have heard tonight on this call. I go to the APPG. They did a paper for me and they presented it to every MP in Westminster on the 3rd of December 2018. That was authored by Dr. Fiona Sheriff and Heather Buchanan. The records are there. My MP, Jim Shannon, spoke to the motion at the time and was not only critical of Danske Bank, but did call them thieves and used language that Jim is totally unaccustomed to. And the speaker at the time actually made reference to it. Now, you have all spoken in your own manner and in your own way of personal guarantees and how you've been slighted by your bank. My bank is the most crooked bank, I believe, in the UK at this moment in time. And why do I say that? Because Northern Ireland, and I know from the accents, I'm speaking to fellow countrymen, Northern Ireland is a very small part of the United Kingdom. Far enough away from Europe, I believe, for no one to be keeping an eye on what they're doing. They get all sorts of great awards. The awards mean nothing. They are crooks. Now, getting down to your March on the 18th, first of all, I thought it was the 27th, Andy, but 18th is fine for me. I have conducted now several marches of my own in Northern Ireland to the World Championships Golf at Portrush a couple of years ago, to every event that I possibly can that is supported by Danske Bank. I have my own high-vis vest, I have my own flags, I have my own banners. And Andy, you and I have talked about this in the past, that the only way that these crooks are going to be held to account is by putting them in jail. Now, I know from recent experience of the post office, how did the post office manage to get such a covering because of numbers? We, as businessmen who have been caught by these banks, we're not fighting in numbers. We're fighting one at a time. And the banks don't listen. Look at John Guidi in Glasgow today. Sits in his tent outside Clydesdale Bank, a disgrace. They have done the same to me. Destroyed a business, destroyed a family, took my home, they've got the lot, and I'm not finished with them. They timed me out. Again, another issue that we ought to look at in detail, how they do that. Now, I was going for fraud, quite clearly, but by the time I had finished with the bank, and they had finished with the use of their solicitors, their lawyers, and so on, they timed me out, and I got caught out. But they have made some cardinal mistakes that are not in the rule book, not in theirs, but they're in mine. And I thank Maeve again for reminding me of a couple of pieces of legislation in the European Union that she quoted, and I shall be chasing that as hard as I can. The other thing about your protest march in Dublin, one thing that I found that I needed to do in the north was to make sure that I had the authority to do what I was doing. And I was attacked several times legally on the street for having my protest. But I had pieces of paper in my hands that gave me the authority by the PSNI in Northern Ireland and the local councils in Northern Ireland to hold my protests. And did I enjoy showing those people those bits of paper? And not only that, but the PSNI in Northern Ireland were happy to use my bits of paper to the people who were harassing me and my wife in a disgraceful manner. And those policemen, I salute for taking my part. Now, the biggest issue that I have from beginning, day one, and again, it goes back to something that Maeve put up front. First comment, the battle of the money. I had no money to fight Danske Bank, totally overweight, totally outgunned, no possibility. And I have been through BBRS, the APPG, a private tribunal funded totally by Danske Bank. Now, what does that tell you about me? I'm an idiot. Don't fall for all of that stuff. The BBC have also got 3.5 hours of interview between them, my wife and myself in the can, and they're afraid to broadcast. I have spoken to the director of the BBC. I know him very well. He went to school with my daughter. He's now the boss, and he's afraid to stand for me, a friend to his family, my family, for many, many years.
Thanks you.
The Belfast Telegraph have done it. The Mail on Sunday have done it. Why can't the BBC do it? And why can't the BBC do a programme on banking and the scandal that is behind it. Thank you, Andy, and thank you, folks, for listening to my rant. Theo, you're not the only one.
Hubert, thanks very much indeed.
Rant.
Hubert, thanks so much. In fact, you've queued me up perfectly to share my screen again and share something with you folks. There is absolutely no doubt that what we need is a combination of media activity and political activity. That is, if you like, the cocktail that brings about the change that we need to see. Folks, what you're looking at here is a 1-hour BBC documentary, a high quality 1-hour BBC Panorama documentary called The £1 Billion Savings Scandal. Myself and Transparency Task Force were very involved with this. It was about one of the investment scandals we have been trying to draw attention to, and it's about catastrophic regulatory failure. It's an A1 high quality BBC Panorama documentary. I'll put a link to it in the chat. Please do watch it in due course. The reason I'm mentioning it is because probably the single most important thing that's happened in my life this year has been the ITV documentary, Alan Bates versus the Post Office. Without a doubt. What that documentary has done has been to make believable things that have always been true, but that the general public at large would not have believed. The dishonesty, the lack of integrity in the post office, the way the civil servants kept the politicians in the dark, the way some of the politicians didn't do what they definitely should have done, the way that totally innocent people, I still can't get my head around this, folks, the way that totally innocent people, at least one of whom was a pregnant lady when she was sent to jail, was sent to jail. What the F is going on there? You know, my point simply being that we need the media to pick up on this narrative, and nothing does it better than a film or a documentary. We know that from our own personal experience with BBC Panorama, and we know that because of the work of the absolutely groundbreaking Alan Bates versus the Post Office. You know what? Many people have said to me that the story around the vulture funds is a much, much bigger and frankly, much more interesting story than the Post Office scandal. Terry McMahon is... Tony, do you want to come in there, Tony?
Yeah, I just want one quick thing to say before you go.
Go for it.
I had the pleasure of having a Zoom call with Maeve when I was in America recently on my holidays, and she said something to me that has actually stuck with me since, and I think it should be something that we should all bear in mind. We go into courts, Andy, wanting to play by the rules. The people who are opposing us in court have no intentions of playing by the rules, none whatsoever. They will twist, manipulate, misinterpret, misrepresent. They'll do everything rather than play by the rules. And typical of that is the post office, a blueprint, an absolute blueprint of the reckless indifference that these people have towards the law, towards fairness, towards any reasonable expectation of dealing with somebody fairly. These people don't know anything about that. I just thought I'd mention that. Thanks, Andy.
No, you're absolutely right. Folks, really pleased Terry McMahon has decided to join us tonight. I think Terry's still with us. Terry, please do introduce yourself if you wish, and share any thoughts that you may want to. Entirely down to you to say what you want to say, of course. Perhaps you'd like to explain why you wanted to come along tonight, Terry. Over to you, sir. Thank you. Terry's still with us. Terry, are you there? Might be off making a cup of tea. Calling Terry. Terry calling Terry. Okay, maybe not. But what I'm going to do, folks, is I'm going to quickly find a part of this week's Transparency Times, because there's something else I really do want to draw your attention to. It's in this week's Transparency Times. It's about a matter which is not in any way relevant to the financial services sector.
Sorry, Andy. I see Terry's off mute there now.
Oh, okay. I'll tell you what, I'll just finish off my point, Terry, then I'll jump to you. Thanks for your assistance, Brian. Guys, what I want to draw your attention to part of this week's Transparency Time. So just bear with me a second while I get to it, and then we'll go to Terry. So for those of you that don't know, we produce a weekly newsletter. It goes to about 5,000 people. About 4 of those are in the UK, and the rest are in 20 or so countries around the world. And there's just one thing I particularly want to draw your attention to, because it was a radio program I started listening to a few days ago, and I don't mind telling you, I'm a big strong man, and I'm 60 years of age. I'm really tough, and it brought me to tears. This effing program, this radio program, made me cry, and it made me cry because it was about people. It was about people being. I don't even want to say it. It was about people who were dying in the Grenfell disaster. The Grenfell disaster, for those of you in Ireland who may not have heard about it, was a catastrophic, an absolutely catastrophic fire in the UK. Many people died. I encourage you, however upsetting it is, to listen to this Radio 4 program, and I'll tell you why. Even though it's nothing at all to do with financial services, the fundamental issues that caused the authorities to put listen to this, inflammable cladding around a high-rise building where men, women, children, babies lived is insane. It's just insane. There's nothing else you can say. But it happened because of the very issues that we are fighting against. It happened because of catastrophic regulatory failure. It happened because of the David versus Goliath dimension to the challenge of getting justice. It happened because of the woeful lack of responsibility, transparency, and accountability, the disinformation from civil servants to ministers, the perilous tension between protections and profits. People were literally making decisions based upon, if we do it the cheap way, we'll make more money. Let's do it the cheap way. We'll then make more money. Yes, it might mean that occasionally some people get burnt to bloody death, or little babies suffocate to death, but it's going to make more money. This is the kind of egregious uber capitalism that we are fighting against. I'm a capitalist, right? But there's an aggressive form of capitalism that's becoming like a cancer in society. And that fundamentally, folks, is what we're fighting against. Terry, thanks for your patience, sir. Sorry, I went off on a bit of a rant there. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you all for your patience. It's equally devastating and inspiring to hear everyone's story today. It's amazing that you talk about the post office. Film is what I do, and I've seen the power of what film is capable of doing. I was also the group behind the taking of Apollo House, which was used to house the homeless. And part of that objective was to make sure that we made somehow the front page of the New York Times. We did, kind of, because it was the digital New York Times, but we made the front page. I wrote the speech called "This is Our Ireland." It was seen by over 4 million people. So I have first-hand experience of the power of the moving of the heart to wake up a nation. The problem is that after that, I was cancelled. After that, I had all state funding pulled from all projects. Everything was removed. If you have the capacity to build a story, build a narrative in such a way that it touches the heart of the nation, it shifts everything. And that's the one thing the government is terrified of, because it's the one thing they can't control. Because cinema is about art, and what they do is about propaganda. What they do is about lies, cinema is about truth. All this basic idea. And I think that there is not just one story, but profound stories to be told about this specific issue. I had my home stolen from me by the banks. Again, I have first-hand experience of how obscene these people are. And we mustn't forget they are people. They're not just institutions. People make these calls. People make these directly impactful, horrible. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Carry on, Terry.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right. So I'll just end up by saying that the people in this group, the people talking here, the spirit is astonishing. But when I hear words like hopeless being used as well, I totally understand that too. And yet it's not. There's a dormant quality in our culture at the moment where people are beginning to wake up to the reality that they're being screwed over every day. And one thing that's very, very interesting is that the government claimed there was never any money to be able to handle this housing crisis. We've proven with these massive new buildings put in motion that was a lie. And people want, and I don't mean this in any nationalistic sense, but they want to protect their families, they want to protect their homes, they want to protect their towns, their counties, they want to protect their country. And this is the time to reach into their heart. And that is done through film. That's all I'd say.
Oh, Mr. McMahon, can I please invite to show the appreciation to you that you deserve for what you've done in the past, what you're doing now, and what you've just said? Because I think you've absolutely identified the one thing that could be a torpedo below the waterline for what needs to be done. We need an Alan Bates versus the post office. And I'll tell you what, sir, if the only thing stopping that from happening is money, we'll get the effing money. Somehow we'll get the effing money. If that's the only thing stopping it from happening, we'll get the money. And I'm making that commitment now. I don't know whether we're talking about, thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of pounds. I am making a commitment to you now that somehow we'll find the money for the folks like yourself and others, the Jim Sheridans of this world, to create an Alan Bates versus the post office, because money is the easiest thing to get hold of, right? It's the easiest thing to get hold of when the cause is sufficient. We'll be talking, sir. We'll be talking. Thank you so much.
Terry, if I may, I hope you're free on the 18th to share some words of wisdom with us. On September 18th.
I'll be there.
I'll be talking to you.
Wonderful. We'll be speaking further. I'll ask my colleague Alexander and Chelsea to fix up a conversation. Myself, yourself, Terry, and Mr. Brian Riley, and somehow we'll get the money. I don't care what we need to do or what we need to sell, but somehow we'll get the money. Because if we had an Alan Bates versus the post office about the vulture funds in Ireland and the UK, frankly, it's going to be the most potent piece of art anybody could imagine. Anybody could imagine.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Terry. Thank you very much. We'll go to any other folks for anything else we can do to bring the conversation to a close. Does anybody have anything they are itching to say before we do wrap up the meeting? Anna Kavanagh, how can I forget Anna? To you, Anna. To you. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Andy. Last night here in Ireland, RTE had a documentary. It was called Stolen, and it was an absolutely traumatizing documentary to watch. It was about the removal of newborn babies from mothers back in the time of the mother and baby homes. But the sad thing is that there is an unbroken chain of state abuse of mothers and children in Ireland. And what people don't realise is that children, newborn babies, as young as a day old, are actually being removed from mothers. Over 100 babies are taken into state care by TUSLA, our Child and Family Agency, every year. And I'm the convener to the Alliance of Birth Mothers Campaigning for Justice, who are one of the groups taking part in the March for Justice. And we represent the mothers whose babies have been taken. And it's just heartbreaking. And I'll finish by saying that we kind of can forgive people in the past for what happened, because there was just so much secrecy, and the vast majority of people didn't actually know what was happening. But this generation will never be forgiven for our failure to put a stop to the trade in babies and children. It's so lucrative. Andy, you mentioned there about the Grenfell Towers, and in actual fact, that cladding was made in Ireland by an Irish company called Kingspan.
Yeah, they make Celotex. That's right, Celotex.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it all boils down to profit, and taking children into state care is extremely lucrative. Private for-profit companies are receiving up to €350,000 per child per year. And the top 10 companies in Ireland, the for-profit companies, are making tens of millions of euro annually. So whether it be the vultures and houses or babies being taken from their mothers or the Grenfell Towers, it is, as you said, Andy, all boils down to this capitalism. I can't remember the word you used to describe the form of capitalism. So I'll finish on that.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Folks, we're going to bring today's conversation to a close in just a few moments. I'm going to very, very quickly bring up onto my screen the final point that I want to share with you. It's a thought that I personally think is, well, it's many decades old. It's a few sentences from somebody I was too young to know at the time. But it is a set of thoughts that I think can galvanize support for the kind of things that we are turning our attention to today. Remember, this is not about vulture funds. This is not about babies being taken from their mothers. It's about all of that and more. It's about all of that and more. Fundamentally, this is actually about what we as people choose to put up with and what we don't choose to put up with, what we refuse to tolerate, what we absolutely refuse to tolerate because we know that enough is enough. So Robert F. Kennedy, in the late 60s, talked to us about this. He said, every time we turn our heads the other way, when we see the law flouted, when we tolerate what we know to be wrong, let's think about that. When we tolerate what we know to be wrong, when we close our eyes and ears to the corrupt because we are too busy or too frightened, when we fail to speak up and speak out, we strike a blow against freedom and decency and justice. That, ladies and gentlemen, is why we're in Dublin on the 18th of September. And I don't care if there's 3 of us there, or 33 of us there, or 300 of us there, because however many there are of us in Dublin on the 18th of September, there'll be a lot more the next time. And then there'll be a lot more the time after that. And you've got my complete commitment to make that happen. Thank you all very much indeed for spending your time with me this evening. I really appreciate it. Maeve, special thanks to you. Mr. Terry McMahon, you've made my day, my week, my month, maybe my year. We'll find the money. We'll create Alan Bates versus the Post Office for these issues, and we'll see if we can change the world. We might as well. What else is there to do? Good night, folks. Thank you very much indeed. Good night, good night, good night. Thank you. Thank you. Superb conversation. Thank you all.